Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a pretty heavy topic today, but it's absolutely crucial that we understand it. We are going to be unpacking the official June 2026 Venezuelan earthquake report. And what we're doing here is looking strictly at the data, the timeline, and the very real documented realities on the ground, exactly as they were presented in the official source material. We really just want to understand the sheer scale of this event through the clearest lens possible. Right off the bat, the executive summary of the report hits us with this incredibly sobering quote: a seismic event of unprecedented modern scale, reshaping the geography and the lives of the Venezuelan people in a matter of seconds. Wow, that single sentence really grounds us, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that sudden, absolute shift in reality that happened that day. So we aren't just crunching numbers today. We're looking at a localized, historical pivot point that was meticulously documented in real time. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is how we're going to break it down. First, the 2026 earthquake report itself. Second, unfolding the full story. Third, assessing the death toll. Fourth, the search for the missing. And finally, number 5, our final takeaways and questions. Kicking things off with Section 1, the 2026 earthquake report. So this report is actually incredibly specific in its scope. It's essentially the comprehensive data analysis of the June 2026 seismic event. Its primary objectives? Entirely data-driven. It's designed to carefully document the timeline of the tremors, objectively assess the immediate structural damage, and, most importantly, record the official casualty and missing persons data. This document isn't really about pointing fingers or analyzing the political fallout. It's a strict historical anchor. It's literally there to aid in long-term recovery planning. Moving right along to Section 2, unfolding the full story. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying speed at which everything escalated. At exactly 6:14 a.m., the initial 7.2 magnitude tremor struck just off the northern coast. Literally 8 minutes later, at 6:22 a.m., the very first reports of catastrophic structural failures started pouring in from major coastal cities. Then, and this is just heartbreaking, at 7:05 a.m., while initial rescue efforts were literally just getting underway, a massive 6.8 magnitude aftershock hit. This severely compounded the damage and collapsed a lot of already weakened structures. By noon, a national state of emergency was officially declared, kicking off the absolute widest rescue mobilization in the region's recent history. Now, if we look at the immediate physical impacts, the destruction was incredibly varied across different geographic zones. On the northern coast, a staggering 85% of critical roadways were completely blocked by severe coastal landslides that entirely cut off ground transport. Meanwhile, in the Central Highlands, the main issue was widespread power grid failure, and that was accompanied by massive ground fissures. Then you have the urban centers. The report details that 40% of high-density housing was compromised, with localized flooding from shattered water mains just completely complicating evacuation efforts. But the really crucial point to take away here is the compounding nature of all this. Like those massive landslides blocking coastal roadways, they directly hindered emergency personnel from reaching and responding to those catastrophic housing losses in the urban centers. Which brings us to Section 3, assessing the death toll. 2,415 confirmed casualties. That is the stark, official number recorded in the June 2026 report. It's just a tremendously heavy figure. It represents thousands of individual lives lost in the span of just a few morning hours. Now, what's really interesting and deeply tragic about this data is how it breaks down the impact zones. According to the report, 45% of the casualties were concentrated among coastal urban residents. They took the absolute brunt of that initial 7.2 tremor. Another 30% were in the Central Highland communities, which was largely due to structural collapses in a lot of the older buildings. And then there is a deeply devastating 15%. That 15% were actually first responders and essential workers, many of whom were caught in that 7:05 a.m. aftershock while they were literally out there trying to save others. The remaining 10% were scattered across other affected regions. Let's turn to Section 4, search for the missing. Alongside those confirmed casualties, the report documents exactly 1,180 individuals who officially remain listed as missing. Just think about that for a second. That represents entire families and communities existing in this sort of suspended grief, just waiting for answers. Now, the report highlights a pretty massive and frankly tragic discrepancy that naturally occurs in the absolute chaos of disaster response. You see, the official initial estimates hovered right around 500 missing, but that number was just pulled from preliminary, easily accessible municipal data. As actual ground reports and localized registries started to consolidate, that number surged to over 1,180. And the report attributes this huge gap to two main things. First, entirely disconnected remote villages in the highlands that simply couldn't report in. And second, the catastrophic collapse of subterranean transit hubs in the urban centers, where, tracking exact occupancy in real time is just incredibly difficult. Let's move on and see how this builds into the response. To counter all this chaos, the report outlines a very strict four-phase search protocol. Phase 1 is the immediate local response, basically relying on bystanders and local police for surface extraction. Then Phase 2 brings in the specialized canine and acoustic search teams to find survivors trapped deeper down. Once the acoustic teams clear a grid sector, Phase 3 kicks in, allowing heavy machinery to come in for debris removal. And finally, Phase 4. This marks the grim but absolutely necessary transition from active rescue to recovery, which focuses on the long-term tracking of the missing through DNA and registry matching. And that leads us into Section 5, final takeaways and questions. So the crucial point is that this report doesn't just list a bunch of tragic facts, it actually provides a roadmap for future survival. Looking at the data, it's incredibly clear that subterranean urban infrastructure requires vastly enhanced seismic retrofitting to prevent those terrible transit hub collapses from happening again. Furthermore, the early warning communication arrays, they experienced a critical 40% failure rate. That means almost half of the warning systems went completely dark right when people needed them the most. And lastly, that massive gap we saw in the missing persons data proves that relying on centralized municipal servers is just totally flawed. There is an urgent, undeniable need for decentralized emergency registries that can actually operate offline during a crisis. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. The 2026 Venezuelan earthquake report is, for sure, a meticulously documented tragedy, but it is also a universal warning to all of us. If modern infrastructure and established communication networks can be completely dismantled in mere seconds, are our global coastal cities truly prepared for the seismic realities of tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep asking questions.